Hey, it's Clay. Welcome to another video. This time I wanted to talk about reverb. Um, Reverb is something that has a ton of different uses, and I just wanted to give a couple of little tips for making your reverb a little bit more clean and a little bit more easier to manage. This is just one way that I do it, a way that works for me. Again, there are a ton of different ways to do reverb. I'm just going to talk about the way that I'm doing it. So this is a track I've been working on. I have currently an acoustic guitar, some vocals, and a bass guitar, and I have reverb on the acoustic and the vocals. I'm gonna focus more on just the vocals though. So let's listen to the whole track, and then we'll slowly strip it away, and then we'll start talking about the reverb.
Draw the line. I gotta say, I wasted all your time.
So when I pause there, you can really hear the reverb pop out. So first and foremost, let's get into some of my tips. So my first one is that I really have more success using track groupings and then creating a separate independent track just for the reverb. I find that that gives you more control over it and you can manage it, and so you can, by managing it, you can allow it to really shine where you want it to, but not get in the way where you don't. So what I do is, if this was the vocal line that I recorded, I would just right click and duplicate. So then, and then I would name it reverb, and then this track is going to have its own special set of effects. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. So first and foremost is I actually like to use EQ on my reverb both on the way in and on the way out, and it tends to be doing quite a bit of high and low pass on both sides. So you can see I have both high pass and a low pass. So on the way in, so the first thing it's seeing is it's cutting away everything below 188 and it's cutting away everything above about 6,000. And then on the way out after the reverb, we have another cut at about 6,000 and about 300. So very trying to keep the reverb into a specific set of frequencies. I noticed that when you leave, without putting an EQ, the reverb tends to get very washy, and it can really make your mix a lot more messy and muddy. And so that means that you have to turn the level of the reverb down quite a bit in order to bring back clarity. But then in the meantime, your reverb is really low, so you end up just kind of not hearing it, and it ends up not doing really anything. So with this approach, by using some EQ, you can keep the reverb at a higher mix, but have it be less muddy and messy because the frequencies are being controlled on the extreme. Now I'm using Ambience. This is, I believe, a free reverb plugin. Do a Google search for it, Ambience VST. And I'm just using a pretty straightforward, this is just a stock preset. It really, and not necessarily to get into the basics of how each reverb plugin works, but just to talk about some of the generic controls. Your time is always a very important. That controls the length of the decay. A short decay, maybe between 1 and 2 seconds, is just going to give you a tiny little bit of room splash, while a longer decay up to 5, 6, 7 seconds gives you a very ambient, almost cathedral-like feel where there's a lot of bouncing around going on. Diffusion will kind of smooth out if you have no diffusion, then you'll hear each bounce or each transient. But if you have lots of diffusion, the peaks or the changes will get very much smoothed over. It's kind of almost the difference between delay and reverb. Delay, you can hear it repeats, whereas reverb, it just kind of becomes a very mellow type of deal. There is some EQ here and some damping. A ton that you can do in there, but just at a very basic level, this is how you control some of the frequencies within the reverb itself. Not every reverb plugin has this, but this is kind of, I also kind of do the same type of thing here with these EQs. And then with the shape, your size controls kind of how big, a small size will give you more of that like bathroom tile type feel, whereas the larger size again gives you more of the cathedral feel. A pre-delay gives you a little bit of space in between the initial attack, so you can be clear on the front end, and then it gives you a little bit of space before the reverb actually comes in. Width gives you pretty much just like it says, width versus a more narrow focused reverb. And then lastly is the dry and wet. Now, when you set it up like I do, where you have a completely extra separate track dedicated for reverb, you want to turn your dry all the way to 0, and you want to turn your wet to, I'm sorry, the dry all the way off, and the wet to neutral to 0 dBs. So if we listen to just this, this is just reverb. You're not hearing any dry track, you're hearing only wet.
Go to fall from grace.
So just the vocals.
God put a smile upon your face, oh yeah.
So that gives you a little bit of a picture of what this reverb is doing. Um, and so, really with this, you want to set the time to taste to really get and then the rest of these kind of control the overall feel and the EQ of the reverb. And just really a lot of experimentation. There really is no right or wrong. Play around with presets to get a feel for what each of these really does. But I've drawn up just a very basic sound here, and I think it sounds really good. So I have my EQ set up. I have my reverb set up on its own extra track. And so now what I can do is now I want to balance it with the dry vocals. So if this is the dry
I gotta
vocals,
say, I wasted all your time, honey. Where do I go to fall from grace?
so this is no reverb.
God put a smile upon your
And then with reverb added.
face, oh yeah. And now, when you work it out, I'm worse than you. Yeah.
So what I'm really listening for there is to set, the next step here is to set the level. So right here I have a whole slider dedicated just to balancing the level of the reverb with the dry track. I just find this to be very, very useful. I don't think this track's actually doing anything, so let's get rid of it. So I find this really, really useful because you can have complete control when you have, another option would be to throw the reverb here as an effect on the dry track itself and then play with this wet and dry. But I just find that to be less clean and clear. You don't get quite as much of the EQ controls. You can control everything about the sound of the reverb itself. You can put a compressor on there. You could put some modulation if you want to. You could put some pitch shifting. A lot of really wacky or crazy or creative things can be done by having the reverb on its own track. And even at a more very simple level, you get this volume slider with it all to itself. And so you really can get a balance for it. I'll play it a few times, and especially when you stop or when the voice stops singing, then you hear the trailed reverb more. That's a good time to get a feel for how much reverb is in the mix. So let's listen to it just a little bit more.
Hey, I wasted all your time, honey, honey. Where do I go to fall from grace?
So not a ton of reverb, but on the beauty here is that you have complete and total control over what is going on with reverb sound. You can balance it really easily with the dry. This is just something that I really like to do. Again, not saying that it's the way to do it or the right way to do it, just sharing the way that I like to do it in a way that works for me. So just a couple of quick tips there about reverb in creating its own track and using some EQs to really temper and taper it, keep it nice and well focused. So hopefully that can help you as you are applying reverb to some of your mixes. So let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.